Hello, everyone. I think we're going to get started on our fourth session, or the second session of today. The topic for this session is New Trends, the impact of the next wave of international gallery openings in Hong Kong and beyond. Hong Kong has become an art hub for the top international art galleries to enter the Asian market. Gagosian, Y-Cube, and Periton led the way, followed most recently by Hauser & Wirth and David Zwirner. And although Hong Kong remains a focal point within the Asian region, other cities and countries have seen the expansion of international galleries as well, such as Taipei, which will see Sean Kelly opening a new space there in 2019, Seoul, which just saw Lehman Maupin open a space, and Shanghai, which also just recently saw Periton open a space. A beautiful one that I just saw. It was very nice. Additionally, I think it's important to note that last week during the Shanghai Art Fairs and the biennial, most of the large museums and foundations were showing artists represented by top international galleries. Cindy Sherman, who shows with Metro Pictures, was at the Fosun Foundation. Louise Bourgeois, who exhibits with Hauser & Wirth, was at Long Museum. Matthew Day Jackson, who also shows with Hauser & Wirth, was at Chow Space. And Francis Alice, who shows with David Zwirner, was at the Rockbun Museum. With that, I'd like to invite Magnus Renfrew, the managing director and founder of ARTHQ Group, to speak on this subject. And afterwards, we will have a panel of experts and gallerists that will come together and evaluate the impact of these developments on the region. From talking about local, small, and medium-sized galleries, artists, and the relationship of Hong Kong with the rest of Asia.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for the Hong Kong Art Galleries Association for this opportunity to come and speak with you today. I've decided to sit down rather than stand up so that we can just be a little bit more casual. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them at any point. I was asked to come and give a little bit of background on how I see things that have developed both in Hong Kong and in Asia over the last 10 years, and to reflect on some of my own experiences in professional experiences over the last 10 years through having been both in Shanghai and in Hong Kong and traveling extensively around the region. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Magnus Renfrew. My background is art and art history. I started off working for the auction house Bonhams in Edinburgh, being a general valuer for everything from old masters to prints to contemporary art. I sort of moved through the ranks of Bonhams and found myself involved in starting up the first auction of contemporary Asian art for the auction house Bonhams in London in 2006. And that really opened my eyes to the quite incredible things that were happening out here. The artists seemed to be springing fully formed onto the global stage. And so I was very curious to come and see what was happening in this part of the world. So I was very fortunate. I was approached in the lead up to that first auction of contemporary Asian art in 2006 by the wonderful Pearl Lam, who gave me the opportunity to go and live and work in Shanghai on a one-year contract to run her galleries for her. It was an incredible time. I think 2006 was one of the most exceptional moments on the in terms of the development of Shanghai. I remember looking down from my apartment block and seeing lane houses, each lane sort of retreating one at a time each week as new developments were being created. I was very fortunate to be sent round to different cities and centers of artistic production in China. So I was sent around to Chongqing, Kunming, Hangzhou, Nanjing, and Beijing on studio visits, meeting both young and established artists. And it was an incredible grounding. I won't say it was always entirely easy. It was my first time living in China, And Pearl is a wonderful and very energetic person who sometimes changes direction at short notice. And so I kind of described that time as a beautiful nightmare. But she was incredibly generous to me, and I really feel very grateful that she taught me so much about so much. I think that one of the things that is a recurring theme for me is that in the West, in our education system, Asia doesn't really focus. It's or it doesn't really feature. I think that there's this sort of historical hangover, I think, almost from colonial times, that either you make Asia your life's work or you completely ignore it. It doesn't form part of a holistic understanding of the world. And that's something that I think is finally beginning to change, and I hope so. I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to become the founding director of Art Hong Kong. I was approached by 3 events organizers who'd come up with the idea of organizing an event here in Hong Kong, and they asked me to help them to try and launch the fair, to come up with the strategy and positioning. They'd had a background at more accessibly priced art fairs, but having been based in Shanghai for a year, I could see the buzz and the energy. I could see that Hong Kong made sense for so many different reasons, in terms of tax, geography, shared history of the West, freedom of expression. All these sorts of things came together to make it really a place that had a lot of potential. And so we were given, I persuaded them to give me a travel budget. I was on 40 flights in 6 months trying to persuade galleries to attend. And in the first year, we were fortunate enough to attract 101 galleries from 19 different countries. To give you a sense of how different the world was then, Lehman Brothers were our lead sponsor. And every single exhibitor that I tried to approach asked me, why Asia? Nobody is asking why Asia now. And I think that it's very interesting to see how the scene and the reception to the idea of engaging with Asia has developed over the last few years. I think that when one was talking about the international art world, even as recently as 5 years ago, you were really talking about Europe and America, and that those were kind of interspersed subconsciously. And sometimes I think they still are. And I think that people from Asia are as guilty in that, in terms of perpetuating that terminology, as people from the West. The number of times I hear people talk about local, regional, and international it's just, it happens the whole time. And the reality is that regional in Asia is totally international. I mean, Asia is a huge place, and it has very, very diverse cultures and so on. So I think that there is this opportunity now, I think, and an increased understanding of the outdated nature of a Western-centric view of the world, that Asia should be part of a holistic understanding of the world. And you know, when we were starting the art fair for Art Hong Kong, that was one of our great opportunities. I think it is such a great privilege to be able to try and start something from nothing, because you have the opportunity to create something how you would want it to be, or how you kind of idealistically think the direction should be, rather than having to inherit certain kind of baggage. And it's very, very difficult to turn a big ship than it is to start off on a new course. And I think that was one of the things that we really saw in terms of the opportunity with Art Hong Kong, was that if you looked at other art fairs in the West, they were almost entirely Western-centric. Probably 80 or 90% of the territories from which the galleries came from were from the West. And if you looked at the art fairs in Asia, they were often invitational art fairs, or sometimes they were organized by the Gallery Association or the local Gallery Association. And there's a fundamental different reason for a Gallery Association and for an art fair, and that a Gallery Association is supposed to be kind of a democratic organization, open to anybody that really wants to be a part of it. If they pay their dues, then they can have the Gallery Association to help them lobby government on certain policies, or to have access to people that can help them develop systems of best practice, etc. And those are great and lofty ideals, but in terms of an art fair situation, you have the horrible situation of having a selection committee that has to say no to people. Gallery associations find it incredibly difficult to say no to their members, and that's one of the tough jobs that as an art fair organizer you have to have these really uncomfortable conversations where the selection committee has said no to people. But so that provided us with an opportunity here in Hong Kong, both from a regional perspective, but also from a global perspective. You know, I think that we quite quickly built momentum, and I think that people saw that there were different ways to try and aspire to be the best art fair. You can be the best in absolute terms, in that if the 100 top galleries from Berlin, or if of the 100 top galleries in the world all herald from Berlin, then you have 100 galleries from Berlin. But you can also be the best through being most representative. And I think that in an increasingly competitive art fair landscape, people are really looking to make discoveries, in a sense that they don't want to see the same lineup of galleries, the same artists at every fair that they go to around the world. They want to have the opportunity to see something fresh and different and exciting. And you know, it was a great privilege over the 7 years or so that I was involved with both Art Hong Kong and Art Basel, to see how the scene developed, and to see how an art fair in a situation whereby there isn't a highly developed sort of public art infrastructure, that actually commerce and culture can have a positive impact on each other. And this is one of the things that I think that is important about the gallery system and about the activities of the Art Gallery Association, and also the positive impact of some of the major international galleries coming to Hong Kong. I think if one, you know, maybe just to start off to talk about galleries and why galleries are important and what makes a good gallery. I think galleries are incredibly important to the cultural ecology of any city. You know, I think that they provide a variety of different. They play a variety of different roles. They provide an opportunity for artists to earn a living, to sell their work, but they also provide an opportunity for the general public to see exhibitions. Hong Kong in 2007, when I first came here and first sort of started really looking at the gallery scene, it had a very different gallery scene to the one that it does today. I think that you know, everything was really centered around the Hollywood Road, and a lot of the galleries had evolved out of antiquities dealerships, and antiquities. And the reason for that was that I think that the antiquities dealerships really saw that there was this growing interest in China from elsewhere, and that they wanted to be involved in the opportunity the commercial opportunity to promote art from China to an overseas market. And Hong Kong was a great and natural place to do that. But I think that the thing about antiquities dealerships is that they often have a real emphasis on the artwork as object, and that they are not so concerned necessarily with context of artworks, but actually with the beauty of the object itself. And I think that that also had a reflection on how artwork was presented, that actually rather than creating exhibitions that were promoting the practice of an artist, they were really much more presenting a series of objects. And I think also, to a degree, that the people that were involved in, many of the people that were involved in that scene in the very early days, perhaps didn't come from an art history background. And so in a sense, they were promoting an idea of what contemporary Chinese art might be or should be. So there was a lot of images of Maos, pandas, the color red, smiley faces, and so on, that were quite derivative of a first generation of more meaningful artwork that was from China. But there weren't really a lot of international exhibitions in Hong Kong. I think that the two main places at that stage for really being able to understand art from the region, to understand Hong Kong, and also to do things in a very critically and curatorially minded way were the Asia Art Archive and Parasite Art Space. And I always say this, but they were the two places that I really, through which I discovered Hong Kong. And they are, and they remain very, very important institutions that I'm very proud to be a part of. And Warren, I saw earlier, who was the founder of Parasite, and Tobias, I see at the back there, played an incredibly important role in building Parasite. But it's been interesting to see how, in parallel to the development of the art fair, that there has been this expansion of the gallery scene. And some people attribute it to the art fair, and some people don't, but I like to see it more as in parallel. And I think that the reason that the galleries came to Hong Kong is the same reason that the art fair came to Hong Kong, in that it just makes sense as a place to engage with Asia. It's a very, very good base from which to explore the different collector bases of Asia. And Hong Kong makes sense for a huge variety of reasons, some of which I've outlined already: tax, geographical reach. I think there's a very wide catchment area for Hong Kong, both geographically in terms of transport links, but also psychologically. I think that there's probably nowhere in the world where people feel quite so equally at home. That English is commonly spoken. You can get whatever food you want. There is things are exciting and different, but also at the same time there's a certain familiarity which makes it more comfortable for visitors from Europe and the United States, for example. But I think that one of the first moments where I really felt that things were changing, I think, was kind of almost in the second or if you like, the third wave of gallery influxes. And I think that was when White Cube and when Paratin moved to Hong Kong, that you could really, it was the first time after that fair, I think it was it 2011, Emmanuel? When did you open? 2012. I just remember very clearly, I had been so busy traveling that I hadn't had the opportunity to travel around, to walk around the galleries prior to the fair that year. But I just after the fair had some downtime and was relaxing, and I just wandered around the galleries. And it was the first time that you could really wander around the galleries in Hong Kong and just see that there were all these incredible exhibitions happening. And so it really felt that it was a turning point. And I think that's really important, because an art fair is part of any story for a city. It can never be the entirety of a story. It really helps to put the spotlight on what's already happening here. And I think that people were quite unfair and harsh in talking about Hong Kong in 2007, 2008 as being a cultural desert. It wasn't. The reality was there was lots going on, but it wasn't very easy for people to navigate. It wasn't very easy for people to digest. And so I think one of the things that an art fair can do is to help put the spotlight on what's happening, and also be a focal point around which people can galvanize and present their best face for a wider audience. And that's something that I think that that the fair has definitely made a contribution. But there was already a lot of interesting things happening here. But that moment in 2012, wandering around the galleries, really felt like something had very much changed, and that's very exciting. And that the importance for that, in a sense, is that it meant that art was now available for people to see 365 days of the year, not just the week of the art fair. And that's really, really quite incredible. And I think if you see over the last few years, the caliber of the exhibitions and the caliber of the galleries that you have here on the ground permanently in Hong Kong, I don't think Hong Kong actually realizes quite how lucky it is in some respects. Hong Kong genuinely now has one of the best gallery scenes in the world, and that's really remarkable if you sort of look back over the last decade and how things have changed. But talking about the sort of more recent influx of galleries coming to Hong Kong, we're talking about the next wave. So I'm kind of just trying to work out what the next wave means. But I guess that's sort of H Queens and so on. It's quite a long time since the last wave. 2012 is some time back now. But in terms of galleries like Hauser and Wirth and David Sverner coming to town, is also a testament to the rising importance of Asia, and also the seriousness with which the biggest galleries in the world are taking not only Hong Kong but Asia as a whole. In terms of the impact of that, and in terms of there's a couple of things I want to talk about in terms of the impact. First of all, talk about the impact of those recent moves of these blue chip galleries coming to Hong Kong on the overall scene, but also in general the arrival of the Western galleries coming into the Hong Kong market and the impact that that's had. I think in terms of the more recent side of things, that whereas perhaps in the past with earlier waves, that a lot of the local galleries, the smaller local galleries, started to feel the pressure of competition. I think that now actually the bigger galleries are starting to feel the competition, that everybody's starting to take Hong Kong and Asia much more seriously. And so, I really believe that competition is a good thing, and I think that it helps to raise standards. And we're seeing now that all galleries are taking their exhibition programming very, very seriously in Hong Kong. I think in the early days, some people were trying to find their feet. Some people were doing group shows or inventory shows. That's no longer enough. Galleries have to put their best foot forward and have really, really credible shows of great work by their best artists. And I think that one of the reasons why the galleries are actually coming to Hong Kong is that it's very competitive for the biggest galleries in the world to retain their artists. And their artists have demands. Artists can be quite demanding people, so I'm told. That they have their own expectations of what a gallery can do, and the access to different markets that a gallery can bring. In terms of the impact on some of the smaller galleries, I think that definitely that I think that people have been feeling the pressure through new entrants to the market. I think that's definitely the case. One of the areas that I think is particularly challenging for, or one of the very specific kind of segments of the market that I think is very, very challenging for the gallery scene, is for younger artists and homegrown talent. Just because the reality of the cost of overheads and the real estate costs, that the business model just does not stack up for selling young artists' work. I mean, if you're selling experimental work by young artists, the chances are that the price point is quite low, and that also that it's quite challenging work. It may not be that easily digestible. And so I think there's a real gap there that currently isn't satisfied by the current gallery scene for those artists that have, from graduation to success, there is that gap there that isn't necessarily catered to by the current market environment. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because I think that the structural headwinds to that are so strong. I think that it's one area where non-profit spaces such as Parasite have been able to play a major role in helping to provide those artists with a platform. And there are galleries that are really making great efforts in trying to promote local artists. Historically, like Osage Gallery in 10 Chancery Lane, and more recently, Edouard Malang. But I think it would be great to see more galleries really trying to help promote the local cultural ecology and the local artists. One of the positive things I think through the international connectivity that I think an art fair can bring. I think that I think there's been an increased kind of awareness of some of the artists from Hong Kong, and so it's been great to see major international galleries like Gisela Capitaine, for example, taking on Samson Young, and there are other examples of artists who've really had international exposure through a sort of an increased awareness of what's happening in Hong Kong. But what's interesting now, I think, is that in this increasingly competitive environment, that galleries are taking Asia much more seriously, not just in terms of parachuting into Hong Kong once a year. Those that have moved here understand very well that they cannot just focus exclusively on the Hong Kong market, but they have to use Hong Kong as an opportunity to explore Asia. And Hong Kong is a very good place to base yourself in which to explore Asia. But galleries are now expanding into different domestic marketplaces within Asia. And I think that from an art fair perspective, which is my background, if you look at Art Basel in Hong Kong is now unquestionably the global fair for Asia. And I think perhaps with the exception of Shanghai, which I think last week I was there, and I think they have 2 very strong art fairs there. But with the exception of Shanghai, I think if you look elsewhere in the region, the domestic marketplaces are not so well served by the current art fairs that exist there. And so I think that there's an opportunity there, which I'm taking advantage of and hoping to take advantage of, launching a fair in Taipei in January and then again in Singapore in November. I think there's an opportunity there to create a model of an art fair, which is not trying to chase sort of the Art Basel model, if you like, of having the very best galleries, having an emphasis on galleries from the West, or having a balance of Western and Asian galleries, but to really try and have something that has a focus on Asia. So with Taipei, we have a very strong local support base. We've got 20 galleries that have spaces in Taipei, for example. We have 50 galleries from outside of Taiwan, but from within Asia. And then we have 20 galleries from the West. And we've done this on purpose. We want to be regional on purpose. And I think there has been a sense that regional has been second best. And I think that that's really quite an old-fashioned way of looking at the world. And so, I mean, when I say we've got 20 galleries from the West, I mean, they're the best 20 galleries from the West. We've got Perrotown, we've got Gagosian, Hauser's, Werner, Gladstone, Sadie Coles, Neugerim, Schneider, etc. But we wanted to make sure that we had much more of a sort of an Asia emphasis, not to be an Asia art theme show, but to have an Asia emphasis, just to be respectful of the environment in which we're operating. And I think that there is this increased desire from galleries that are making an extra commitment to Asia to engage in more depth with local collector bases and domestic collector bases around the region, of which there are many strong collector bases. The Taiwanese are very strong, the Koreans are very strong, the Indonesians are very strong. And of course, China has exceptional potential and already has some very strong collectors. So that's, in a sense, that's what the next step of things for me is, to try and see if we can help to build those domestic collector bases around the region and to bring in new entrants into the market. I think one of the things that when we were starting off with Art Hong Kong is that we really made accessibility a key part of, one of our 3 core values. We had quality, geographical diversity, and accessibility. And I think that that's really because I think the art world can be a little bit exclusionary and a little bit navel-gazing sometimes. And the reality is that artists are trying to make sense of the world and their place within it as much as we all are. Art is about the great issues of love, loss, sex, death, man's inhumanity to man. And these are things that are relevant to all of us, not just those of us that can afford to buy things. So I think that accessibility is a really key part of trying to help to build the audience. But I think that in terms of the contribution that the galleries and the gallery, a strong international gallery participation can make to a scene, I mean, they're multifold. I think that that Hong Kong really now has a reputation, not just being a center for trade and finance and shopping, but it is actually developing a reputation for art and culture. And undoubtedly that's partially through to initiatives like the Asia Society, M+, and Tycoon. But it's also, I think, in the interim, it's really shored up and reinforced by the presence of and the commitment of major international galleries. And I think it's really important to say that I think being a gallerist is not always an easy job. I think people sort of seem to sometimes think that that being a gallerist is a license to print money. The overheads are prohibitive. The travel schedule is crazy. The sacrifice that gallerists go to help to promote their artists and to build the career of their artists is really something. So, you know, I think that that really needs to be acknowledged. But I think there's a great opportunity for Asia. I think that in Hong Kong things have developed out of all recognition over the last 10 years. If one looks at Shanghai, things have really transformed over the last 5 years or so. My hope is that through our activities in Taipei and Singapore, that we'll be able to introduce people to the possibilities for those scenes and for people to get excited and to discover those scenes. Not with the ambition of trying to create something that would rival in scale or scope something like Art Basel, but to create something that was really particular to the region. But anyway, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you, and we have a panel discussion, I think, starting shortly. So thank you very much. Thank you.